Next question is: a DevOps engineer is building a continuous deployment pipeline for a serverless application using AWS Code Pipeline and AWS Code Build. The source, build, and test stages have been created with the deploy stage remaining. The company wants to reduce the risk of an unsuccessful deployment by deploying to a small percentage of customers and monitoring this deployment prior to a full release to all customers. How should the deploy stage be configured to meet these requirements? A. Use AWS CloudFormation to publish a new version on every stack update. Then set up a code pipeline approval action for a developer to test and approve the new version. Finally, use a code pipeline invoke action to update an AWS Lambda function to use the production alias. B. Use code build to use the AWS CLI to update the AWS Lambda function code. Then publish a new version of the function and update the production alias to point to the new version of the function. C. Use AWS CloudFormation to define the serverless application and AWS Code Deploy to deploy the AWS Lambda functions using deployment pCanary 10% 15 minutes. D. Use AWS CloudFormation to publish a new version on every stack update. Use the routing config property of the AWS Lambda alias resource to update the traffic routing during the stack update. Correct answer is C. Next question is: a DevOps engineer must track the health of a stateless RESTful service sitting behind a classic load balancer. The deployment of new application revisions is through a CI/CD pipeline. If the service's latency increases beyond a defined threshold, deployment should be stopped until the service has recovered. Which of the following methods allow for the quickest detection time? A. Use Amazon CloudWatch metrics provided by Elastic Load Balancing to calculate average latency. Alarm and stop deployment when latency increases beyond the defined threshold. B. Use AWS Lambda and Elastic Load Balancing access logs to detect average latency. Alarm and stop deployment when latency increases beyond the defined threshold. C. Use AWS Code Deploy's minimum healthy hosts setting to define thresholds for rolling back deployments. If these thresholds are breached, roll back the deployment. D. Use metric filters to parse application logs in Amazon CloudWatch logs. Create a filter for latency. Alarm and stop deployment when latency increases beyond the defined threshold. Correct answer is C. Next question is: a DevOps engineer is leading the implementation for automating patching of Windows-based workstations in a hybrid cloud environment by using AWS Systems Manager, SSM. What steps should the engineer follow to set up Systems Manager to automate patching in this environment? Choose 2. A. Create multiple IAM service roles for systems managers so that the ssm.amazonaws.com service can execute the assume role operation on every instance. Register the role on a per-resource level to enable the creation of a service token. Perform managed instance activation with the newly created service role attached to each managed instance. B. Create an IAM service role for systems managers so that the ssm.amazonaws.com service can execute the assume role operation. Register the role to enable the creation of a service token. Perform managed instance activation with the newly created service role. C. Using previously obtained activation codes and activation IDs, download and install the SSM agent on the hybrid servers, and register the servers or virtual machines on the Systems Manager service. Hybrid instances will show with an ME prefix in the SSM console. D. Using previously obtained activation codes and activation IDs, download and install the SSM agent on the hybrid servers, and register the servers or virtual machines on the Systems Manager service. Hybrid instances will show with an I prefix in the SSM console as if they were provisioned as a regular Amazon EC2 instance. Run AWS config to create a list of instances that are unpatched and not compliant. Create an instance. Scheduler job, and through an AWS Lambda function, perform the instance patching to bring them up to compliance. Correct answer is B and C. Next question is: a company needs to introduce automatic DNS failover for a distributed web application to a disaster recovery or standby installation. The DevOps engineer plans to configure Amazon Route 53 to provide DNS routing to alternate endpoint in the event of an application failure. What steps should the engineer take to accomplish this? Choose 2. A. Create Amazon Route 53 health checks for each endpoint that cannot be entered as alias records. Ensure firewall and routing rules allow Amazon Route 53 to send requests to the endpoints that are specified in the health checks. B. Create alias records that route traffic to AWS resources and set the value of the Evaluate Target Health option to Yes, then create all the non-alias records. C. Create a governing Amazon Route 53 record set it to failover, and associate it with the primary and secondary Amazon Route 53 record sets to distribute traffic to healthy DNS entries. D. Create an Amazon CloudWatch alarm to monitor the primary Amazon Route 53 DNS entry. Then create an associated AWS Lambda function to execute the failover API call to Route 53 to the secondary DNS entry. Map the primary and secondary Amazon Route 53 record sets to an Amazon CloudFront distribution using primary and secondary origins. Correct answer is A and C. Next question is: a company is implementing an Amazon ECS cluster to run its workload. The company architecture will run multiple ECS services on the cluster, with an application load balancer on the front end, using multiple target groups to route traffic. The application development team has been struggling to collect logs that must be collected and sent to an Amazon S3 bucket for near real-time analysis. What must the DevOps engineer configure in the deployment to meet these requirements? Choose 3. A. Install the Amazon CloudWatch Logs logging agent on the ECS instances. Change the logging driver in the ECS task definition to OS logs. B. Download the Amazon CloudWatch Logs container instance from AWS and configure it as a task. Update the application service definitions to include the logging task. C. Use Amazon CloudWatch events to schedule an AWS Lambda function that will run every 60 seconds running the create export task CloudWatch logs command, then point the output to the logging S3 bucket. D. Enable access logging on the application load balancer, then point it directly to the S3 logging bucket. E. Enable access logging on the target groups that are used by the ECS services, then point it directly to the S3 logging bucket. F. Create an Amazon Kinesis data firehose with a destination of the S3 logging bucket, then create an Amazon CloudWatch Logs subscription filter for Kinesis. Correct answer is A, D and F.